So I got something super cool for you. Well, not cool exactly. More like really disturbing but fascinating. You know what I mean? We're diving into a case today on Doors that
Oh my God, yes, the University of Idaho killings from 2022. This one is like absolutely wild, and I've been researching this case for days because there are just so many bizarre elements to it.
I know, right? 4 college students just stabbed to death in their own house while they were sleeping. And the crazy thing is, it happened in this tiny, peaceful college town where nothing like this ever happens.
Exactly. Moscow, Idaho had literally not seen a murder since 2015. It's this super quiet place where everyone feels safe, you know? And then suddenly, 4 students are found brutally murdered in their off-campus house, and no one has any idea who did it.
And the case went unsolved for what, like 6 weeks? The whole community was terrified.
Yeah, it took them around 6 weeks to finally track down the suspect. And the person they arrested wasn't even, connected to the victims in any way that was obvious. It was this criminology Ph.D. student from a nearby university, which is, that's just so chilling.
So let's talk a bit about Moscow, Idaho. It's this really small college town with about 25,000 people?
Yeah, exactly. It's this classic rural college town where, the University of Idaho is basically the center of everything. And what's really striking about this case is that Moscow hadn't seen a murder since 2015, 7 years without a single homicide, and then this happens.
That's what makes it so shocking, right? The kind of place where people don't lock their doors and everyone feels safe walking around at night.
Totally. And the 4 victims were just typical college students, you know? Kaylee Goncalves was 21, she was from Rathdrum, Idaho, and she was actually a senior about to graduate. She had just moved out of the house but came back that weekend to visit friends.
Oh, that's so sad. She was just visiting?
Yeah, she had moved out but wanted to hang out with her bestie, Madison Mogen, who everyone called Maddie. She was also 21 and a senior. Those two were super close friends who'd known each other since 6th grade.
And the other victims were...
So there was Xana Kernodle, who was 20 and a junior, and then Ethan Chapin, also 20, who was a freshman. Ethan and Xana were dating, and he was actually just sleeping over that night because he didn't live there. He lived at the Sigma Chi fraternity house.
So the house itself was a rental for students? How many people lived there?
Right, so it was this 3-story off-campus house that had 6 bedrooms, with 2 on each floor. 5 female students lived there, including Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana, and there were 2 other roommates who, they survived that night. They were on the first floor and somehow didn't hear anything during the attack.
That's really eerie. Did all the victims know each other well?
Yeah, they were definitely all connected. Maddie and Kaylee worked at the same restaurant together, and Xana and Ethan were this cute couple. Just normal college kids, you know? Living together, hanging out, going to parties. All in this house that was just a short walk from campus in this super safe town where nothing bad ever happens.
And then everything changed in one night.
Exactly. It's unimaginable. These kids were all in their beds, in what should have been the safest place for them. And, yeah. The house itself was well known among students. It was this 3-story place with this big front porch where people would hang out. Just a typical college rental that suddenly became the scene of something horrific.
So, let's talk about what actually happened leading up to the murders. What were they all doing the night before?
Yeah, so this was Saturday night, November 12th, and they were basically just doing normal college weekend stuff, right? Ethan and Xana, the couple, they went to a party at Ethan's fraternity house, Sigma Chi, which was super close to campus.
When did they head to the party?
They got there around 8 p.m. and stayed until about 1:45 in the morning when they headed back to the girls' house. It's just so awful to think about, but they were just having a normal Saturday night, you know? Ethan was probably just planning to crash at his girlfriend's place like college kids do all the time.
And what about Kaylee and Madison? Were they at the same party?
No, and they actually went downtown instead. They hit up this place called the Corner Club, which is this popular sports bar that students go to. They got there around 10 p.m. and stayed until about 1:30 in the morning. And there's actually footage of them after that because they stopped at this food truck called the Grub Truck.
Oh, really? So there's actual video of them that night?
Yeah, it's actually kind of haunting because there was this Twitch live stream from the food truck that shows Kaylee and Madison like just chatting and smiling while waiting for their food around 1:40 a.m. They're just totally normal, you know? Getting late night food like any college student would.
How did they get home from there?
So initially, police said they took an Uber, but later they clarified it was actually a private party who gave them a ride. They got back to the house around 1:56 a.m., and by 2 a.m., all four of them, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, were back at the house.
So all 4 victims were home by 2 a.m. Do we know what happened after that?
Well, there were some weird phone calls. Kaylee called her ex-boyfriend like 7 times between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., but he was sleeping and didn't answer, and Madison called him 3 times too during that same time period. The police looked into it but determined pretty quickly he wasn't involved at all.
That's so strange. Were they concerned about something?
We don't really know. Could have been just drunk dials, you know, just college kids being up late. One last weird detail though. There was actually a DoorDash delivery that came to the house around 4 a.m. for Xana, so we know she was probably still awake at that point.
Right before?
Yeah, right before everything happened.
So, what exactly do we know about the actual attack? Like, the timeline of when all this happened?
Well, this is where it gets really chilling. So after that DoorDash delivery around 4 a.m., things took a horrific turn. Like between 4:15 and 4:25 in the morning is when investigators believe the killings happened. And you know what's really disturbing? One of the surviving roommates actually encountered the killer.
Wait, seriously? She saw the person who did it?
Yeah, it's honestly terrifying. So there were 2 other roommates in the house who weren't harmed. One of them was sleeping on the 2nd floor, same floor as Xana and Ethan, when she was woken up by what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog. And then she heard someone saying something like, "There's someone here."
Oh my God.
I know, right? And this poor girl, she opened her bedroom door twice within a few minutes. The second time she heard crying coming from Xana's room and then a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Can you imagine how absolutely terrifying that would be?
That's just horrible. Did she see him?
Yes, and this is the part that just gives me chills. She opened her door a 3rd time and saw this figure dressed completely in black with a mask covering his mouth and nose walking toward her. The man just walked right past her and left through the sliding glass door. And she was just frozen in shock, you know? She locked herself in her room after that.
I can't even imagine being in that situation. So what happened after that?
Well, security cameras near the house picked up sounds of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog barking a bunch of times starting around 4:17 a.m. But here's the really weird part. The 911 call wasn't made until almost noon the next day.
Almost noon. That's like 7 or 8 hours later, right?
Exactly. The surviving roommates apparently called some friends over because they thought one of the victims on the 2nd floor was unconscious and wouldn't wake up. Someone finally called 911 at 11:58 a.m. requesting help for an unconscious person. When police arrived, the door was open, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry.
What did they find inside?
It was just awful. The 4 victims were found on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the house. Madison and Kaylee were in Madison's bedroom, while Xana and Ethan were in Xana's room. They'd all been stabbed multiple times. The walls were spattered with blood, and the police pronounced all 4 of them dead at noon.
This is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and Kaylee's dog was found alive on the 3rd floor, completely unharmed. It's just such a stark contrast to the violence that had happened just hours before. And you know, the really disturbing thing is that it appears the victims were all in bed when they were attacked. Some of them had defensive wounds on their hands showing they tried to fight back, but they didn't stand a chance.
So, how did the university and the community react after they found out about these murders?
Oh my God, it was complete chaos, honestly. The university immediately canceled classes for the next day, November 14th. They also planned this candlelight vigil, but actually had to postpone it for 2 weeks because everyone was just, in shock.
I can imagine people were terrified, right?
Absolutely terrified. And what made it worse was that the police initially told everyone there was no threat to the community, but then Just 3 days later, the Moscow police chief had to backtrack and said, "We cannot say that there is no threat to the community." So people were just like completely freaking out at that point.
Oh no, that's so confusing for everyone.
Right? And fall break was coming up after November 18th, but tons of students didn't even wait. They packed up and left town early. Like there was this mass exodus because, I mean, who wouldn't be scared? 4 students were brutally murdered and the killer was still out there somewhere.
Did the families of the victims say anything about how the investigation was being handled?
Yeah, the fathers of Kaylee and Ethan were really vocal. They criticized the police and the university for not sharing enough information with them. And I don't blame them, you know? Their children were murdered and they felt like they were being kept in the dark.
Ugh, that must have been so frustrating for them.
For sure. And then this whole thing just exploded on social media. There were all these TikTokers and self-proclaimed psychics and like internet sleuths who started spreading all kinds of wild theories and rumors. It got so bad that the police had to issue statements specifically about the misinformation, saying it was creating community fears and spreading false facts.
Social media always seems to make these situations worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the police even warned that people harassing or threatening those potentially involved could face criminal charges. But despite all that drama, the investigation itself was massive. I mean, we're talking about almost 130 law enforcement officers from 3 different agencies: the Moscow Police Department, Idaho State Police, and the FBI.
Wow, that's a huge team.
It really was. And they were absolutely flooded with tips. By early December, they'd received like 2,600 emailed tips, 2,700 phone calls, and 1,000 digital media submissions. By Christmas Eve, that number had grown to at least 15,000 tips. It was just overwhelming, you know? But they needed to check everything because that one critical piece of information could be buried in there somewhere.
So, with all those resources and tips, how did they eventually find the suspect?
Well, it's actually super interesting because, like, the break in the case came from something that might seem pretty ordinary at first. So investigators had been receiving hundreds of tips, right? And on December 15th, they announced they were looking for a very specific car, a white or light-colored Hyundai Elantra made between 2011 and 2013.
What made them focus on that particular car?
So security cameras in the area caught this Elantra, you know, driving around the victim's neighborhood multiple times that night. And I mean multiple times. It passed by the house 3 times starting around 3:29 a.m. and then it came back a 4th time at 4:04 a.m. And get this, at 4:20 a.m., right after the estimated time of the murders, the car was seen speeding away from the neighborhood.
Oh wow, that definitely sounds suspicious.
Totally suspicious. And then investigators in Pullman, Washington, which is like this college town right next to Moscow, they started looking into a white Elantra belonging to this 28-year-old Ph.D. student named Bryan Kohberger. He was actually a teaching assistant at Washington State University, and he had driven that car with his father all the way home to Pennsylvania for the holidays.
Did they have other evidence besides just the car?
Oh yeah, they had way more. The cell phone data was like incredibly damning. Kohberger's phone stopped connecting to the network around 2:47 a.m. in Pullman, which, you know, suggests he turned it off. Then it reconnected around 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is along the route back from Moscow to Pullman. And what's really strange is that his phone pinged near the victim's residence around 9 a.m. that morning, about 5 hours after the killings.
Wait, he went back to the scene?
Seems like it. And they also found that his phone had pinged from the cell tower nearest to the house at least 12 times between June and the day of the murders. But the most crucial evidence was probably the DNA.
DNA at the crime scene?
Yeah, so investigators found this tan leather knife sheath on Madison Mogen's bed, and they got DNA from it. And here's where it gets really high-tech. They used this public genealogy database to find a partial match to someone related to Kohberger. To confirm it, they actually went through his parents' trash in Pennsylvania and found DNA that was consistent with the DNA on the sheath.
That's incredible detective work.
It really is. They were like watching him before the arrest, too. They saw him wearing surgical gloves while taking out trash, and apparently he had meticulously cleaned his car, inside and outside, not missing an inch. I mean, that's not exactly normal behavior, right?
No, that definitely sounds like someone trying to cover their tracks.
Exactly. All this evidence together, the car sightings, the cell phone data, and especially that DNA evidence, it was enough for the FBI to move in. They arrested him on December 30th with a SWAT team at his parents' house in Pennsylvania. And when they found him, he was in the kitchen putting trash in separate Ziploc bags while wearing examination gloves. I mean, talk about suspicious behavior.
So, now that we know how they caught him, who exactly is Bryan Kohberger? What's his background?
So I got something super cool for you here. Bryan Kohberger was born in November 1994 in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And his life before all this is actually really interesting, especially considering what he's accused of now, right?
Did he always want to study criminal behavior? That seems like a strange coincidence.
That's the thing that's so bizarre about this whole case. He was, totally immersed in studying criminal justice. After graduating high school in 2013, he kind of bounced around a bit education-wise. He started at this technical institute but dropped out after a year. Then he went to Northampton Community College, where he got an associate degree in psychology in 2018.
What did he do after that?
Well, after that, he worked as a security guard for the same school district where his dad was a maintenance worker for years, and his mom was a substitute teacher. But here's where it gets really weird. He went on to get undergraduate degrees in psychology and cloud-based forensics. And then in 2022, he got a master's degree in criminal justice from DeSales University in Pennsylvania.
So he was studying the very thing he's now accused of committing?
Exactly. And it gets even more strange because in summer 2022, just months before the killings, he moved to Washington State to pursue a Ph.D. in criminology at Washington State University in Pullman. And Pullman is, less than 8 miles from Moscow where the murders happened.
That seems too coincidental.
I know, right? At the time of the murders, he had just finished his first semester as a doctoral student. He was working as a teaching assistant there, but, what's really interesting is that less than 2 weeks before the murders, faculty members actually met with him to discuss concerns about his behavior and conduct.
Oh, really? What kind of concerns?
The details aren't super clear, but whatever it was serious enough that on December 19th, they terminated him from his teaching assistant position. And the university specifically cited his behavior and performance as the reason.
That timing is definitely suspicious.
Totally suspicious. And when they finally arrested him on December 30th, it was pretty dramatic. The FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police found him at his parents' home in Monroe County. He was in the kitchen dressed in just a shirt and shorts, wearing those examination gloves I mentioned, and putting trash into separate Ziploc baggies. Who does that unless they're trying to hide something?
And how did he respond when they arrested him?
Well, he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary. He was appointed a public defender and held without bond. On January 3rd, he agreed to extradition back to Idaho, and the next day they flew him to Pullman and then drove him to the Lada County Jail in Moscow, where he's been held without bail ever since.
So what's happened with the legal case since his arrest? It's been quite a journey, right?
Oh my God, yes. So, in May 2023, the big development was that Kohberger was officially indicted by a grand jury on 5 charges. 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each victim, and 1 count of felony burglary. They had scheduled this whole preliminary hearing for June, but once he was indicted, they just canceled it.
Did he plead guilty or not guilty?
That's actually one of the weirdest parts. During his arraignment, he refused to enter a plea at all. His attorney said he was standing silent on the charges, which is, pretty unusual. So the judge had to step in and enter a not guilty plea for him.
Wow, that's strange. What about potential punishment if he's found guilty?
Well, in late June 2023, the prosecutor's office announced they're seeking the death penalty. They cited, aggravating circumstances in the first-degree murder charges, and they denied him bond, so he's been in custody this whole time.
Has the trial started yet?
Not yet. There was a big development in September 2024 when the judge granted the defense's motion for a change of venue. So instead of being tried in Moscow where it all happened, The trial is now scheduled to take place in Boise with this judge named Stephen Hippler. And just this past October, they finally set dates. Jury selection starts July 30, 2025, with the actual trial beginning August 11, 2025.
That's nearly 3 years after the murders. How has the university community been coping with all this?
They've been really focused on honoring the victims in meaningful ways. In February 2023, the university announced that the house where the killings occurred was donated to them, and they demolished it completely in December last year.
I imagine no one would want to live there after what happened.
Exactly. And they're planning this memorial garden on campus for the victims, which I think is a really beautiful tribute. They've also created scholarships in the names of 3 of the victims, Kernodle, Chapin, and Mogen.
That's a wonderful way to honor their memory.
Yeah, and in what I thought was just such a touching gesture, the university awarded posthumous degrees to all 4 victims at their spring commencement ceremonies in May 2023. Acknowledging the futures they should have had, the graduations they deserve to experience but never got to.
When I think about how this tragedy has affected the University of Idaho community and really the entire town of Moscow, it's just hard to put into words.
Yeah, it's really devastated so many people. I mean, this was a town that hadn't seen a murder since 2015, right? And then suddenly 4 young students just living their normal college lives were taken in such a violent way. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
The demolition of the house seems like an important step for the community to heal. Do you think that was the right decision?
Oh, 100%. I mean, nobody would ever want to live there, And keeping it standing would have just been this constant reminder of what happened. The university getting the house donated to them and then tearing it down on December 28th last year was, I think, what everyone needed. It's like physically removing that painful landmark while still acknowledging what happened there.
And the ways they're choosing to remember Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan seem really thoughtful.
For sure. The memorial garden they're planning is going to be such a beautiful tribute. And those scholarships in their names, that means their legacies will continue through other students for years and years to come. It's turning something so dark into something that will actually help future students, which I think it's exactly what should happen, right?
It reminds me that even in the face of something so senseless, communities find ways to come together.
Absolutely. And, the posthumous degrees really got to me. These were 4 young people with their whole lives ahead of them, studying, making friends, falling in love, just doing normal college stuff. And then everything was just taken away. But at least the university found this way to honor what they had worked for, what they deserved to complete.
As we wrap up today's episode of Doors, I think it's important to remember that while this case will eventually conclude in a courtroom, the impact on those who knew and loved these 4 students will last forever.
Yeah, and I think that's really what we should take away from this whole terrible situation. It's not just about the investigation or the suspect or the trial. It's about 4 lives that mattered and a community that refuses to let them be defined solely by how they died.